Let us celebrate the Indianness of everyone. Let us not let anybody, because of their religion, feel that they are less Indian than we are. That is my conviction. North versus South. I think that was a question that perhaps Mr. Gurumurthy and I would answer differently. I believe that our federalism is really in trouble. The Prime Minister speaks of cooperative federalism, but it seems that the states are the only ones who are expected to cooperate, whereas the union government operates at its own sweet will. The government's decision in 2017 to change the terms of reference of the 15th Finance Commission to base allocations, financial allocations, on the basis of the 2011 census has already prized open a North-South divide, even if Mr. Gurumurthy says it doesn't exist. Because it has opened up Pandora's box with incalculable consequences for our country. The Finance Commission's revised allocations have sent even more tax money from the South to the North than previously. And this North versus South expression is a title of a book by a Tamil writer called Neelakanthan R.S., who wrote that India is rewarding the brute demographic advantage of North India over a state's performance. That the bind that Tamil Nadu and Kerala in particular, which is your state and my state, find themselves in, is there at a stage where their success is being used against them by the union government, which is seeking to aggressively redistribute resources based on population alone, on what he calls brute demographic might. Says these states made improvements to health to find that the reward for that is to have less money to spend on health. Their improvements in education meant they'd have less money to spend on education. And the 16th Finance Commission, which has just been announced, will be worse. And if the next census takes place soon after this year's elections, as the Home Minister has said, it will even be worse still for the South, because population disparities have only worsened. The irony is that historically the South has already been subsidizing the North. For example, for every 1 rupee of tax contributed by Uttar Pradesh, the state receives 1 rupee 79 paise from the central coffers, whereas for every 1 rupee of tax contributed by Karnataka, the state receives 0 rupees 47 paise. That is the difference. All southern states, I think, recognize the need to correct regional imbalances and for richer states to subsidize poorer ones. But it is fair to ask, as Karnataka CM Siddaramaiah has done, where is the reward for development? So to take that same example, Karnataka meets 72% of its expenses from the state's own taxes, whereas Bihar only has to meet 23%. 77% of Bihar's expenses are given by the union government. So unlike most federal systems in the world, India's revenues are going disproportionately to its worst performing states. Those with poor levels of education, high rates of fertility and population growth, and the high performance states in the South, like yours and mine, are getting short shrift. In 1976, as you may remember, the Omnibus 42nd Amendment to the Constitution froze the allocation of Lok Sabha seats to all states for 25 years to encourage population control by assuring states that success in limiting population would not lose them Lok Sabha seats. In 2001, the then NDA government, headed by the BJP Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee, extended this arrangement for another 25 years. So that proposal became the 91st Amendment. It was unanimously adopted by all parties in both houses of Parliament. And this was also reflected in the terms of all the finance commissions until Mr. Modi constituted the 15th and told them to use the 2011 census. Now, worse still, the 91st Amendment lapses in 2026. The government has made it clear that there will be a new delimitation of constituencies. You know, even the Women's Reservation Bill will only be implemented after delimitation is done. If the intention, as many suspect, is to fill the rather cavernous hall of the new Lok Sabha building, then Uttar Pradesh alone may have more MPs than all the southern states put together. Where does that leave our federalism? If, for instance, the Hindi-speaking states can alone muster a 2/3 majority in Parliament to amend the Constitution, what would prevent them, for instance, from passing a law making Hindi the official national language? Every year, somebody from the BJP gets up and asks for that to be done. And I say this because the North's enhanced political clout in Parliament will be coming at a time when population disparities will still worsen in the short term. Tamil Nadu's fertility rate is 1.6, Kerala's is 1.7, UP's is 3, Bihar's is 3.2. So you could argue, why should Kerala be punished for its impressive performance by receiving less revenue from the Finance Commission and also losing seats in Parliament? thereby being forced to dilute its voice in national affairs? Why should Tamil Nadu's reward for extraordinary economic success, sustained growth, and population control be lower tax revenues from the centre? Now, the government's answer would be these are the rules in a democracy. One person, one vote means the more people you have, the more political clout and tax rupees you should get. Tough. But in a country like India, whose diversity is held together by a sense of common belonging, but whose civic nationalism must accommodate a range of states with divergent levels of development, it is essential that all people feel that their common nationhood is a winning proposition for them. I am a very proud Indian, and frankly, I don't think Malayalis can afford to be anything else because Malayalis are all over the country, working everywhere in India. But in a country where regional, religious, linguistic tensions are never far from the surface, the answer that we have more people, so we will have more money and more power, risks rupturing the fragile bonds that hold us all together. We've seen the erosion of federalism with the ruling party's use of the legislation like an obscure provision of the Disaster Management Act during the COVID pandemic to impose the lockdowns from the centre. So states had no say. Strictly speaking, a lockdown is a law and order mechanism. Law and order is a state subject. But no, the centre did it. And the fact is that the states therefore had no control over these lockdowns during the COVID pandemic, and their ability to respond to the pandemic was restricted. The invention of PM Cares, which meant a limited flow of funds to the CMs, the various CMs relief funds, because everything was now going to a new PM fund. The acceleration in the proportion of central sponsored schemes that effectively reducing states to mere implementing agencies. And add to that the move towards destroying the balance in our fiscal federalism that in previous governments was carefully maintained so that our states felt empowered. Now, you have to know funds transferred to states from the union government has gone down in each of the last 3 fiscal years, from 4,60,575 crores in 2021-22 to just 3,59,000 in 23-24. A similar trend can also be seen in the devolution of tax revenues. The state's share of tax revenues has come down to just 30.4% in the last budget, whereas in the 14th Finance Commission, states used to get 42%. So we are in a situation where this government has increased its own financial powers at the expense of the states. And on top of that, they've also increased the cesses and surcharges, which do not need to be shared with the states. So in 2011-12, the last figure I saw for the UPA government, cesses and surcharges was 8.16% of gross tax revenue. Under this government, it has tripled to 28.08% of gross tax revenue. Now, the question is, if over 10 years you can more than triple the amount of money you're getting that you can spend in the centre and not spend in the states, what happens to our federalism? And I do worry about the Hindi, Hindutva, Hindustan politics of this government, because this culture of Aryavrat domination that infects the attitudes of some has already raised disquiet amongst many, many southern politicians. And maybe Mr. Gurumurthy and others here may not feel it's such a big issue. I think it's a very serious issue because the financial and political consequences of all of this threaten the very unity of India. If the South faces political disenfranchisement to go along with a sense of financial victimization, then that combination is absolutely bound to generate resentments that can spill over beyond the confines of our routine politics. I don't want the unity and integrity of India to be threatened in any way. And like every Indian, I rejoice in our successes and applaud our aspirations. But at the same time, we must ensure that we pursue this adventure in a more open and more equitable society. Sorry I took so long in answering that 4th question. The 5th one that I noticed from the Q&A that was going on was about ED. Now, you're all free to have your own views on who deserves to be investigated by ED, but it is more than slightly curious that somehow, however widespread corruption may be in this country, only opposition politicians attract the attention of the ED. I find that quite remarkable. And what is more, an opposition politician being investigated by the ED can suddenly become innocent if he just goes and joins the BJP. That's all that is required. There are half a dozen instances where this happens. Now, I think Mr. Gurumurthy is a man who believes in standards, who believes in integrity. I don't think that the ED, CBI, tax intelligence, IT raids and so on are anything but a political instrument of the government in power that targets only opposition politicians. And I don't think that is healthy for our country. Finally, on the sixth point, which of course is the one that, my gosh, I've already taken most of the time Mr. Gurumurthy gave me, so maybe I'll skip the speech and just end with this. The sixth point was on the Ram Mandir inauguration. And I can see that there are many, many areas we can talk about. I must say I have some sympathy for Mr. Devakumar Dikshita, who came and talked about the missing Dhwaja Stambham, because the fact is that in Kerala all temples have a Dhwaja Stambham, and we, following the Agama Shastras, would normally expect this temple to have that. I'm not sure it's accurate to say there are no Agamas in the north. The Agamas are written everywhere, and as far as I'm aware, that Shastra applies in many northern temples also, but each temple has its own distinctive style. It's also part of the diversity that Hinduism celebrates. But having said that, when the four Shankaracharyas are all saying this is an incomplete temple, it cannot have a prana pratishtha at this time, the temple must be fully complete, and the prana pratishtha cannot be performed by a political leader, it has to be performed by a religious leader. I must say, as a Hindu, I find that a very persuasive argument. I don't think, I mean, fortunately, I was not invited, so I don't have to be accountable for going or not going right now. And let me tell you, I do intend to go, but not on the 22nd of January. Because the 22nd of January for an incomplete temple is a date chosen by a prime minister for his own political benefit ahead of the elections. Let's be very honest about that. And therefore, to go there for that function, where the starring role is with the prime minister and the priests and pujaris and purohits are merely sort of playing supporting roles, and in a temple which is still under construction in many places, is to many of us a very troubling act. It is a purely political act. And I would love to see politics and Hinduism kept separate from each other. I don't believe that ours is a religion that prescribes any role for politicians in its conduct. Of course, kings were always powerful in the ancient days. And at the same time, I would want to say that I fully respect the rights of others to go on the date of their choosing. If they choose to go on 22nd, that's very good. And I hope that those who wait to go until the temple is fully complete and choose a later date, which has nothing to do with elections and is ideally even after elections, those should also be respected. That is my final submission. Yes, no, I think people are welcome to go on 22nd if they wish to, if they have the ability to go, if they're invited to go, whatever, they're welcome. I'm not saying that, I'm just saying, please understand that there are some very respected Hindu leaders who have questioned the suitability of this event. And as a Hindu, you are free to take the advice of the Shankaracharya. You're also free to take the advice of the temple organizing committee. That is the great thing about our faith, is that we all have freedom. And since I have already, I think, reached 28 minutes out of the 30 I was given. Yeah, shall I go on a little further? While we're waiting for Mr. Annamalai to arrive, I do have to move on though. No, I had plenty. I actually came with a text which I'm not going to bore you with now, but let me say a couple of things that's worth saying. You know, I've often said that, you know, when I came here, I expected to be speaking after Mr. Annamalai, and I thought that, you know, it's also true. There's a very well-known saying that any truism about India can be immediately contradicted by another truism about India. And anything you can say about India, the opposite is also true. So our country's national motto emblazoned on the governmental crest is Satyameva Jayate, truth alone triumphs, but you can ask the question, whose truth? And it's a question to which there are at least 1.4 billion answers if the absence of a census for the last 13 years hasn't underestimated us again. But that sort of an answer is no answer at all, and so another answer to this question has to be sought. And this may lie in a simple insight that I would like to offer you, which is that the singular thing about India is that you can only speak of it in the plural. There are, in the hackneyed phrase, many Indias. The very idea of India is of one land embracing many. The idea that a nation may endure differences of caste, creed, color, culture, cuisine, conviction, costume, and custom, and still rally around a consensus. And that's a very simple consensus, a democratic consensus, on the basic principle that in a large, diverse democracy under the rule of law, you don't need to agree on everything all the time. except on the ground rules of how you will disagree. The reason that we have survived all these years, all the stresses and strains of the last 76 years, and remember, including periods when many foreign observers predicted India's imminent disintegration, the reason we have held together is because we managed to maintain consensus on how to manage without consensus. Now, today, some people in positions of power in our country seem to be questioning those very ground rules. And that, sadly, is why it is all the more essential to reaffirm them now. And I want to speak a word for our constitutional democracy, because it is our constitution and our democracy that has given Indians of every imaginable caste, religion, culture, cause, the chance to break free of their lot and to fulfill their aspirations. And this possibility of thriving and flourishing excuse me, rests on free institutions created by the Constitution. I've written a book called The Battle of Belonging, where I talked about ours as a civic nationalism and not an ethno-religious nationalism. A civic nationalism rests on a constitution and institutions. An ethno-religious nationalism rests purely on identity. And my argument is that our liberal, inclusive, and just constitution, which is based on this principle of civic nationalism, has been the bedrock of keeping our society together and has secured the inalienable rights of all Indians. It has not only consolidated the best of our values, including those which our forefathers gave their lives for at the height of the nationalist struggle, but it's also served to liberate the collective aspirations of our people. And I would like to argue that the strength of India is that it's greater than the sum of its parts. I agree with Gurumurthy. We don't want people dividing our country. We want political leaders focusing much more on what unites us. But if that is what political leaders have to do, they should stop harping on the differences of some people in our society and see rather their common humanity and their common Indianness. I've often said the great strength about our Indian identity is and should be that we can be many things in one thing. You can be a good Tamil, a good Muslim, and a good Indian all at the same time. You can be a good Malayali, a good Christian, and a good Indian all at the same time. That is the magic of Indianness. Don't dilute that. Do not come into this temptation of seeing in our magnificent, soaring majesty of the Upanishads and the Vedanta, do not reduce it to a badge of identity like that of the British football hooligan, who says, if you don't support my team, I'm going to hit you on the head with my placard. That is not Hinduism. We have to stand up for the larger ideas that our country is all about. And this is essentially what I want to talk about, that the old India, the Prime Minister talks about new India, but the old India that was fought for by the blood of our forefathers and bathed in the crucible of our national struggle is one in which we had access to an inalienable set of freedoms, and the freedom of choice was prime. The freedom to choose what government you wanted, the freedom to choose what set of convictions to resonate with, the freedom to choose what to eat, who to love, how to love, the freedom to choose what to wear, or which language to speak, the freedom to move freely within the sovereign borders of our country, and the freedom to choose whether Ram or Rahim or Jesus or Jehovah or none of them was the force that guided and moved the cosmos. All these freedoms are enshrined in our Constitution, and they're embedded not just in the letter and spirit of the law, but in the lived experience of India and its peoples. And I think it would be a sad thing to threaten that by trying to impose an illusory and dangerous uniformity in the name of our unity. And that's the distorted version of the Indian idea that has been rising in some quarters, with a dangerous ethno-nationalism being fostered, where a narrow-minded majoritarianism is being promoted through incidents of communal violence and Gaurakshak vigilantes and mob lynching, zealots supported by the bulldozers of the state and draconian laws. Why do we want that? Why do we want to create what one writer has called a republic of fear across larger parts of northern India today? Why not celebrate instead the liberty, the equality, the fraternity, a word that really appealed to Dr. Ambedkar, that our Constitution pledged to give us? And also we must, I'm sure Mr. Annamalai will come. I've seen one of his speeches on YouTube where he talks about the economy and technological advances. Let's applaud economic progress and technological advance, but let us not forget the people at the bottom of the pyramid. Fact is that many of the young people who voted for this government 10 years ago, in the expectation of getting jobs, getting a job, and who still don't have a job, what do we say to them? Many who do have jobs can't afford the same purchases as the market that they could 2 or 3 years ago. Unemployment and inflation are both up. Purchasing power is down. Real income growth has been stagnating in our country. Listening to apologists for the government, reminds me of a cartoon I saw recently showing a government official glibly declaring that the fundamentals of the economy are strong. And the citizen responds, "But I'm not making enough money to survive." And the government official sagely replies, "That isn't one of the fundamentals." So that is the reality of life in India today. And I must say that it's all very well to celebrate a new India, but you can't afford to make a mess of the old India too. I'm going to try and stop there, not because I don't have more to say, but because I really do want to stop within a reasonable amount of time, and you hear other voices as well. But I just want to say, in conclusion, that for me, I celebrate the idea of a nation that is made up of many different kinds of people, an India where it should not and does not matter what religion you practice, what language you speak, what caste you were born into, what color your skin is. It only matters that you are Indian and that we respect all faiths, all beliefs, all cultures, all languages, all regions, and all classes. What we want is unity. What they want is uniformity. We believe in an India that unites our people, and they seek to divide us. Our ideology wants to bind people together. Theirs separates one Indian from another. I'm here to listen to you, and please do listen to me briefly. I'm about to finish. What we need in a new India is a strengthening of democratic institutions at all levels. We need transparency and accountability. We need to strengthen our Right to Information Act. We need to strengthen institutions that are currently being weakened. We cannot benefit from a parliament which is just a notice board for the government or a rubber stamp for the majority. We must have free discussion. If you felt there was any benefit in listening to me here, let us also have that benefit in parliament. Let us have in our new India a leadership that empowers people and harnesses their collective strength in the pursuit of national objectives, not someone who sees people as instruments of his own power. I want to say very simply, we've heard a lot of exhortations in our country. Make in India, digital India, start up India, stand up India, sit down India, shut up India. I've heard that too. I want an India where there is consultation, where there is dialogue, where you will listen to me and I will listen to you. We must never speak of India shining without asking who India is shining for. And I hope that we will promote policies that both follow, that both deliver higher economic growth and also ensures that the benefits of our growth are enjoyed by the poor and disadvantaged sections of our society. The choice, to my mind, is clear. We can have a new India that belongs to all of us, led by government that works for all of us, or we can have a new India that belongs to some and serves the interests of a few. Let us choose an India that embodies hope, not one that promotes fear. We can support a new India united in striving, not an India divided by hatred. Let us remain faithful to the founding values of the 20th century if we are to conquer the challenges of the 21st century. Let us create an India that truly becomes an India shining, but it must shine for all. Thank you very much. Jai Hind.